Merrimack TV is committed to our community. From gavel-to-gavel coverage of town and school board meetings to updates on town services and projects, we aim to keep you connected.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Fox, Public Works Director for the town of Merrimack.
Hi, I'm Diane Trippett. I'm the town clerk tax collector for the town of Merrimack.
I'm Captain Matt Tarleton with the Merrimack, New Hampshire Police Department.
And keep the public informed of every motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And many moments, so you can be confident that we're here for you. Thanks for watching. Stay connected. Follow Merrimack TV on Facebook.
Okay, welcome to the School District Budget Committee meeting of January 26th. The meeting is now in order. We are going to dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance due to the Zoom nature of the meeting. And I'm going to ask Pat to explain the meeting procedures this evening. Pat?
Okay. This meeting is held being via Zoom under the guidelines of the Governor's Emergency Order 12 pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04. Members of the public who want to submit comments to the committee should email the committee using the link on the committee's website, which is found on the school district page, and these comments will be read into the minutes at the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Pat. And I'd like to thank Nancy Rose at this time for setting all this up and getting us going and keeping us in front of the public. It's a little difficult with COVID and everything else that's been going on. So thank you very much, Nancy. We're going to continue with our department budget reviews this evening. And we're going to begin with the food service. David Zicki, who is the department head for food services, and the liaison was Jordan, Carol Lang, and Dan Coakley. So Jordan, would you like to start that off, or would you like Dave to start it off, or what's your pleasure?
I think I'll do a quick little intro and then I'll hand it over to Dave. And I think we'll start by saying we had a good review the other night. Truth of the matter is, there's a lot of unknowns with the situation we're dealing with COVID. Certainly we're not at the same capacity we've been in previous years with the number of people in the schools. So on the one hand, you've got some expenses that are going down because there's less food being consumed. But at the same time, because the food service does operate a little bit differently than other departments, you don't have some revenue coming in because people aren't coming in and purchasing as much food as they would if everyone was in full time. So you've got that going on. And of course, you still have salaries to pay, even if you aren't serving the same number of meals that you served a year or 2 years ago. So that's happening. There is certainly reimbursement from the government for some of the free and reduced meals. That's nothing new. That's always been a part of this budget. And for the most part, I would say we're level funded. The one thing we talked about in the meeting, and really one of the big additions to the budget for the upcoming year, would be the replacement of 2 food warmers, one for Mastrocola Elementary and one for Mastrocola Upper Elementary. This is needed because not all the food is made at every school. So one of the ways we save money is we have certain things that are made in certain commissaries that are then delivered to the other schools. And the need for these heaters, these warmers, is because they're over 20 years old and their job is to keep the food at the right temperature until the students can get that food. So certainly something that is needed. Some other storage racks, but for the most part, I would say it's level funded as we can be, knowing that this is a budget that is dramatically affected by the number of people in the schools, the revenue coming in, and the amount of perishables that we need to buy. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Dave and the rest of my team, and then we're certainly open for questions about this part of the budget.
Fair enough.
Very good. Thank you, Jordan. Great introduction.
Nice to see you again, Dave.
Yes, nice to see you too. Again, this is going to be the budget for the 6 schools that we operate in Merrimack. Just a little note that we do belong to the buying group of New Hampshire, which is a collaborative of over 58 different school districts throughout the state. We've joined the collaborative to get some extra purchasing power when we bid out our food products and paper products. So that is one thing that's been a real blessing for a lot of schools in the state, including us. We have great communication between the school districts, and we help each other out, and we attend meetings and discuss things like that. So it's a great union. Like Jordan said, there are some certain things that are a little bit more difficult during this time, and one of them is trying to maintain our sales every day with a minimal amount of students in the buildings. It's difficult. We generally help exist with a la carte sales and such. So with the lack of a la carte sales, it's kind of difficult. The one thing that the USDA did, though, was they extended the free meals to all students. So even though some families have applied for free and reduced meals, and those are definitely still available, so people can still apply, the government has allowed all students to eat free lunches for the rest of the school year. The only difference is if they apply for free and reduced meals and get accepted, they carry over next year. So when they start up, they have a carryover period that they'll carry over for, which is very good too. The only thing that, we've, like Jordan said, we have a couple of things that were asked for, the food warmers. Actually, after we had our meeting, I had a call from one of the kitchens that they need service on one of those warmers. So already, it's funny that happens.
Dave, can you stay moved into your mic? I think when you back up, we lose you a little bit. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So yeah, they definitely need to be replaced, and it would be great if we can get those replaced to start next school year. We had some questions as to why my food purchases were lower last year, and that was basically due to the fact that as of March 13th, we shut down and we had less food being purchased. And next year, we hope to be back in school in September and be back on a normal production basis. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, that's certainly what we all hope for, isn't it?
It sure is.
Dan Coakley or Carol Lang, do you have anything to add as liaisons?
I think he's Brian with a question.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think Brian Stisser had a question.
Well, okay, we'll open up for board comments. And Brian?
So I was wanting to ask, it's been previously discussed that the school board had stated the intent that the availability of meals for all students, regardless of ability to pay, was going to continue as long as the current crisis continues. In spite of the vaccines rolling out, there is a very good chance that come fall we will still be in the economic pain. I think it would be likely that any economic pain is going to last through this next school year, more than likely. If that is the case and the federal help stops, does your budget allow for continuing to offer students who can't afford to buy lunch, but who are not on free or reduced lunch, to be able to still get meals?
we probably would not be able to cover that, but we will always offer people to fill out the applications. And that is, something that we can always handle as far as getting the people approved and getting free meals that way, if they need it desperately.
I think I'll just chime in really quick from a
Sure.
school board perspective. We discussed going through the end of this school year, the fiscal year that we're in right now, with the schools. The school board has not discussed the following school year at this point in time. We sort of took it in the chunk to get through the end of June. I would imagine the school board will talk about that topic as we get closer. At this point in time, there's nothing in the budget to pay incrementally to pay for meals through the next year, because I think the intent is we'll be back, and if people need free and reduced, obviously there's a process, but as things get closer, the school board at the time will certainly be up for discussions on that. So I think it's just too early to know about that.
I will share something with you, though. I also belong to the School Nutrition Association's board of directors, and one of the things that every year they have a legislative action committee process going on, and this year one of the things that they're asking the Congress for is to permanently expand the breakfast and lunch to students at no cost. I don't know how that's going to fly with Congress because of the expense, but we've had a good sample of how things work when all the kids are getting fed for free. So that's up in the air still.
Okay, so I have two follow-on questions. First of all, do you have any even rough idea of what the budgetary impact at the district level extending that would be if we assumed no federal support going forward?
As far as dollar value for free meals, I couldn't come up with a number right off the top of my head, but
okay,
if we had to feed all the students for free, it could be sizable. Yeah.
Okay.
Matt, is that something that you have could estimate based on what our
reimbursements?
Well, not even the reimbursements, but knowing what the number of meals that we supported, particularly during the spring, is there any way to, sort of estimate or project, or is that something that I'm sure we could? The question is it something we could do now, or would we get back to Mr. Stisser on that question? That's a question for you, Matt.
You're muted, Matt.
Yeah. I don't think you could extrapolate what our recent history was based upon the spring, because at that point in time, I think we were doing, what were we doing, Dave? Like 300-400 meals a day?
Yeah, right around 300.
Right around 300, and we were paying all the staff, and you have to get up to, I don't know how many meals a day to break even.
Right.
So it would be probably a couple $100,000, just a rough guess if you want a number. That's okay. What I would imagine. Yeah.
And laying aside any concerns about how it would be received, whether it's fair from some families' perspectives, would there be anything from a legal perspective that would prevent offering a free or reduced lunch to students who don't pay, but still allowing families with the means to be able to pay if they choose? Essentially saying, if you have money in the account, we're going to bill the account. If you don't have money in the account, we're going to feed the kid anyway. Would there be anything legally that would prohibit that?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So, I mean, prior to the pandemic, we've had students that are paying, some that are free and reduced, and some students that couldn't afford to pay, they were able to charge a meal. So that's still an option.
So we would allow them, if the board took it upon themselves to assume the liability, of that, you'd have to utilize the general fund to pay for it. You would allow charging, but at the end of the year, I've got to write that debt off anyway before we close the book. So it would be up to the school board if they wanted to continue.
So if that were to happen, it would simply be a matter of allowing the charges to accumulate and then writing it off as bad debt at the end of the year.
Absolutely. Okay. That's what we do. Yep.
Okay, Andy, I'm sure you're going to take that under advisement back to the school board.
Doc?
Hello?
Doc, it's Carol.
Yes, Carol.
Yeah, one thing, and I'm making a guess here, and if I'm wrong, somebody please correct me, but I'm guessing that the application for free and reduced price lunches works like just about every other government application in that they base it on your prior year tax return. And due to COVID, I think we have an unusual situation where a lot of people lost their jobs partway through 2020. And I think you're going to have a sizable number of people who don't have enough income to really afford lunches, but also won't be able to qualify for free and reduced because their income shown on their tax return for the prior year would not qualify them for the program. So I think we need to take that into account and find some way that those people could still get the free lunches if they're in need of them.
The free and reduced applications are based on current employment, so it wouldn't be from the previous year, it'd be from the previous month or 6 weeks. So
okay, it's not like other federal programs where they say, you know, what was your last year's income on your income tax return?
No.
Okay, well that at least makes things a little better.
If I could just weigh in quickly, Chuck, on this, I want to just say two things. The first is that I think the district has shown, the board, you know, and administration has shown its commitment to serving families, you know, in this time. We had a special meeting, I believe it was March 17th, and I know that only because, you know, certain things are ingrained in my head. And March 17th, we asked the board, you know, for a special meeting and presented this question, and they, you know, immediately accepted. So we certainly have a willing board and a willing administration. And the other thing that I would say is that Dave, and I give him a lot of credit, he and his staff never turn away a student. And if there is an error and that happens, it's a one-off and we correct it. The other thing I'll say, and I think it's just important to note this, one of the phenomena that I've found happening since this pandemic is the phenomena of schools being the resource for, you know, an awful lot of things. And what I don't see is, frankly, enough effort from other entities to step in and to share in some of the burden. I'm talking state and others. So I would just say that these are really good questions, and I would encourage those on the budget committee and those in the community listening to, you know, lobby your legislators, your state reps. I mean, some of this aid is you know, some of the support for our friends, you know, in the community can come from other places too. So, you know, I just feel like I need to just point that out. People often, you know, point to the schools to provide certain things, but, you know, we need help from other places to help us do that. Some of it's regulatory, some of it's financial. So anyway, I just stating the obvious, but, you know, that might be another avenue for people to consider if this particular issue is of concern. There are other places to seek support as well.
Tied to that, Mark, there's been talk before about having all students complete the free and reduced lunch applications so that those who may be reluctant, if everybody's completing it, there'll be more that will qualify who wouldn't have completed it if it isn't sent to everyone. Has that been implemented?
We send out applications to every family. So, I mean, we don't force them to send them back. That's the only thing.
is it feasible to make that a required piece of paperwork for students each year?
I don't think you can do that by law, Dave.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd enforce it. I mean, that's gonna be really tricky to do.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Some people just don't want to. They feel they don't want to be embarrassed by that. So.
Well, it's been our history that even though some people may qualify, they just refuse to fill out the form. I've seen that happen before. Yep. Even though years ago when we put in the computerized system, it's almost impossible for another student to figure out if somebody's on free or reduced or anything like that, especially at the at any level, because they just swipe their cards and it just goes ding, it's paid. So you don't even see it.
I would like to speak on behalf of the board here in that we all share the concerns about other participants in educational responsibilities. And I would ask Andy, particularly as a message from the Budget Committee, to have the school board and the administration speak to this issue with a delegation from our representatives to Concord and see what you can hammer out. There's no reason why the school district should go it alone when we have so many capable representatives in Concord.
So I will carry this forward. I will just chime in really quick that part of the issue is that with all the funding that's coming from these various COVID relief efforts, a lot of times it's not really clear what the next 2 months are going to look like in terms of funding and things. And there's programs from some of the funding to cover the lunch costs. There's some things at the Fed level that are being done. The concern we have of looking too far ahead is we don't want to commit to something or commit or get the state legislatures to do something if the federal is going to come in. It's sort of like a top-down effect. But I will, just to close the discussion down, I've heard what you're saying. I will carry this back as a topic to the school board so that we can investigate the right time to have the discussion.
I'd recommend that there be no timidity in following through on this, simply because your superintendent has just indicated that it's not just a question of free and reduced lunches, but there are serious considerations on other entities which are a part of our larger community, not fully participating in the needs of our school district. And I think he has expressed that very clearly. And I think that the school board should take that under consideration.
The superintendent has told us more than once the exact same thing he's told you. And we've had some discussions previously, then we will investigate that sooner. But I'll take the action to carry it. It's not something we haven't heard before from the superintendent, and we're on the same page as he is. So.
Well, do you have anything to report relative to those previous discussions?
We've had this, like as I said, Chuck, we found out from Matt a program to get us to get coverage through this year from funding that we're waiting to have a discussion once we get the spring to find out what the fall looks like to determine to bring whether we bring the legislative in to look at state level things. Things are very dynamic. So,
well, he who hesitates is lost.
Well, Chuck, trust me, I will carry it. But this is a school board issue where we have addressed it in the past. We'll continue to address it. So,
thank you.
I just don't want to make it think that we're ignoring the issue, because we're certainly not.
Chuck, can I chime in for a second?
You certainly can, Carol.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction that may be being lost in the conversation. I am surmising, and Andy is free to correct me if I'm wrong, that what he's saying is he doesn't want to ask the state for funding that the federal government is currently willing to provide, because why would we want New Hampshire to pay for it if the government is going to pay for it? The second issue, though, is if there are things the federal government is not willing to pay for, those things would be appropriate to ask the state for help with.
That's relatively accurate. I mean, the state legislators would look to see what the federal funding is going to be, then within the state house distributed through the COVID. I mean, again, this is all based on the current environment and the ripple down of economic impacts because of the pandemic and what these programs are going to do. I mean, they keep changing the rules. As Matt will tell you, the funding rules evolve on a daily basis sometimes. Maybe not daily, but at least weekly. So you're right to an extent, Carol, that certainly we don't want to put something in place at the state level if the federal has got an overarching program.
Well,
You know, it's a small wonder that people dislike government when we hear very serious considerations about the well-being of our school district tossed around for any number of months or years or whatever, without any real substance coming to bear in a resolution or a solution, or even a hope that something might eventually fall out from above. That's just, you know, I dislike going round robin on things when they seem to be so important, and all it takes is people coming together and finding some resolution on it, rather than kicking the can down the road.
My concern from a budget standpoint, we're talking about next year's budget. And yes, I recognize that right now that federal support is there, and the reluctance to have money set aside for something that the federal government may cover. But because the federal government has consistently been short in has only been planning for short time horizons, if the federal government drops off on their support and the economic crisis is going on unabated, having kids that are falling through the cracks because we didn't plan accordingly in the budget to have the funds available to feed them, it is core to the mission of the Merrimack School District in providing a quality education. That's why the free and reduced price lunch program exists, is because if a kid is sitting there and they haven't had breakfast or lunch, they're not learning. So if we can't count on the federal government, if we know that the federal government is not reliable to continue providing that support, it strikes me as a concern. Are we planning adequately for that eventuality if the federal government has decided not to provide that support? And that planning could be, as you mentioned, Dave, that the school board would need to pull the money from general funds. Something else has to be cut in order to feed those kids. But personally, as a budget committee member, I think that it would be important for us to have some type of a plan of how are we going to ensure that the students in the district are continuing to have food to be able to be at a level where they can function in the classroom if the federal government fails us, rather than relying on they're going to keep passing these 1 or 2 month stopgap measures that string us along. At some point they may fail to do that. I think it would be reasonable to assume at some point they will fail to do that, and it may be before the crisis is over.
Ryan, I think that's reasonably well put. Do we have any other discussion from committee members relative to food services? Any other takers? Well, seeing none, we will close on food services and we will move on to student services.
Thank you.
Which is our department head is Heather Barker, and our liaisons were Naomi Schoenfield, Dan Coakley, Lori Peters, and Jordan. So what's your pleasure, people?
Heather, I believe when we talked, we said that you would kick it off.
We did. So thank you very much for having me here again this evening. And I'm going to kick off with the goal, obviously, was to level fund the budget or be as close to that as we could. And taking into account the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to do a little presentation for you, but the two areas that I really want you to be thinking about as we talk through this is, given the COVID-19 pandemic, since March 13, school has been disrupted for all students, and especially for students who have educational disabilities who were already underperforming and needing additional support services in aids, special education, related services, consultations, all those things that in our previous world were provided live. So since March 13th, that system was disrupted, and Merrimack School District and the teachers, the contracted service providers and families have done a remarkable job because of the financial support that this community has given to the school district to ensure that we were able to meet our obligation for many students in relation to
remote services in the spring, a very long summer program. A typical summer program runs about 5 weeks, and its focus is on keeping kids from having severe and harmful regression. Last summer, we ran 3 additional weeks in June and additional weeks in August. And for some students, depending on their IEPs and needs, right up to the first day of school, which historically would not have happened, but we were in a pandemic and those students had not been able to access learning the way they would have had we not been in a pandemic. So as the school year began this year, we had students in a hybrid, and we had students who were fully remote based on whatever the needs were for their families and the children. And then we worked at that individual level with IEP teams and families to develop special education services that were consistent with what is expected by law in their IEPs. And we provided those. Looking ahead to next year, I did not anticipate, had this been a normal year, I was actually thinking we would be really close to level funding it. However, because of the pandemic, that's a huge piece. So looking ahead to this coming summer, our goal would be to increase our summer program like we did last summer, to include the weeks that are not, if school gets out, whatever week school gets out in June, we would continue special education services in order to meet our obligation, which we haven't been able to meet fully for a lot of kids. In addition to that, there's that compensatory education piece, and June, August, up to school starting. So what you will see in the budget I'm going to share with you tonight is a significant increase, a 50% increase in summer ESY services that are going to be offered to students based on our obligation for their IEPs, services that weren't able to be met or gaps that grew because students are not able to access their teachers in the same way, and the paraeducational support and those supports for their general education that they would have had they all been live in school fully. So that's the biggest increase. The good news about that increase is that post-pandemic, whether that's next year, depends on how long this pandemic goes, potentially that could be a 1-year increase and then go away, or it potentially could be a 2-year increase and then go away, depending on what IEP teams determine student needs are based on how kids are functioning and those IEP teams that meet annually for those students. So I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to just pop out a full screen for a second with you guys so I can get the right thing. And I want to just share, just so it's easier to see, our slideshow here. Okay, and then I'm going to escape that. Okay, go here. Sorry about this. Okay. So the Merrimack, am I showing you anything? Here it comes, sorry. And my dogs are barking. Hold on, we're having a little trouble pulling it up. Oh, now my internet's a little unstable. All right, I may not be able to actually share my screen, but I can, if I can, I will. Otherwise, I'll just talk through it. The school district, I focused on 2 things in our budget. Obviously, our budget, can you guys see that? Naomi, can you guys see that? Okay, hold on. I'm going to reshare. Yeah, let me reshare it. It's not unstable anymore. So we got good news here. So this is going to work. This is one of the downsides of doing everything via Zoom. So now you can see it, right?
No,
it's trying to. You might turn your camera off while you're presenting just to maybe give yourself more bandwidth.
Oh, there we go, Andy. Andy, I'm good. Okay. Oh, all right. That's right. We've done that before. Okay. So let me see if okay. So obviously the student services budget is designed first and foremost to meet the individual unique needs of our students who have educational disabilities. In the least restrictive environment, right, which is presumed to be in your local elementary school, middle school, high school, with your typical peers, and as much as possible in that general education setting, with the provision of that specialized instruction, the related services, and any additional aids, supports, or services necessary in order for each of those students to experience that educational benefit that their typical peers would have. So that's clearly our mission, and that we stand by and we're working towards. So that's the focus. We're bound by FAPE, and FAPE is that free appropriate public education piece, which is an entitlement for any student who has an IEP. And that means that, very simply, we provide special education and all of those related services, aids, and supports to students who have an IEP. It's provided at public expense. It has to meet all the state and federal standards and rules. And it must include any student who's been suspended or expelled, or maybe homebound or incarcerated, right? So that continuum of supports and services has to be met. And it must, that idea of appropriateness has to be determined on a case-by-case basis by that child's IEP team. And it has to be in conformity with meaningful educational benefit in relation to that individual student with the IEP. So really what we're talking about here is ensuring that children have access to a free, appropriate public education, including special education. And that gets determined annually by an IEP team that includes the educators, the related service providers, and most importantly, those parents and guardians of that child. And if the child is of legal age, that adult child themselves. So that's one of the key factors that comes to play in ensuring that we are meeting our obligation. Additionally, least restrictive environment is another entitlement or expectations of in school. We are bound to ensure that, to the maximum extent appropriate, all children with disabilities, including children who are in private or public institutions or facilities, are educated with children who are non-disabled. So the focus of special education, as it has evolved since 1975, is to ensure that children who have educational disabilities have access to the same things that children who are non-disabled have access to, including a public education with typical peers, access to the general education curriculum, access to general education teachers, etc. So here, when we think about this, we have to ensure in Merrimack School District that we offer that least restrictive environment and include that continuum of supports and services for students, including such things as a student who is fully integrated in a general ed classroom, who may receive in-class supports and services. A paraeducator may be placed in that setting. A special ed teacher may come in and provide services. The teacher may receive consultation or other supports to assist them in providing that general education access to a student who might actually leave the classroom 2 or 3 times a week to get direct instruction in an alternative setting with other students and a special educator or a paraeducator or a classroom teacher, to a student who may have actual classes in a special ed setting, and you move right down that continuum. So the least restrictive environment is determined on an individual basis, dependent on that student. What the federal government and the state government, and we obviously in Merrimack, because we are an inclusive school district, believe the least restrictive environment to be for most children is the general ed classroom setting. So we would layer in and provide the supports, services, consultation, paraeducator, technology, you name it, all of the services that we would need to provide to that child to keep them in that setting or a combination of settings within their local elementary, middle, or high school setting. So that's another sort of anchoring or pillar to the special education in Merrimack School District. Additionally, and this, over time has evolved, we work with charter schools. Those are public institutions. They are considered public schools. We're obligated, therefore, to provide our students who are in those schools with the same FAPE, that free appropriate public education, and that least restrictive environment in that setting. So when you think about that, that's a little bit more challenging because our special education teachers and much of our special ed services are situated in our public school settings. So We may be able in some cases to send out people who work for us in our schools to a charter school, which we've been able to do successfully for the past several years. So that cost doesn't significantly go up. Additionally, with the rise of Zooming, which is one of the pros of if you want to talk about silver linings of COVID, it offers an opportunity to provide services to children in settings where you don't have to be physically in the same space, right? So that potentially offers, and for some students that's been successful when we have students in charter school settings, we are able to provide that if that is a reliable, valid way to provide those services. And if they're not, then we're contracting with providers or those schools, if they have staff there, to deliver that special education to our students at an additional cost to us. So these three pieces come to play, or pillars, in how we educate our students in Merrimack. Merrimack School District over the last, I shared this last year and I thought it was interesting and important to share again. So when we look at our enrollments and special education, last year, when I came to the district for the 2019-2020 school year, when I came in, I think initially when I came in, there were like 660 students. But for that year, students with IEPs represented 685 students out of 3,913 students. And that included our preschool program. That left us with an overall identification of students who had IEPs in our district at 17.5% overall across the district. 17.5%, or if you want to round it up, 18% of our students had IEPs out of the general population. When you look at the bottom number, the 15.6, that was if we take out students who are in preschool. Because when the state reports, they don't report students with IEPs in their numbers, so I want to offer both. That number drops down to 15.6. Last year, when I came before you guys and I presented to the school board, I shared that our numbers were consistent with the state and other school districts, hovering in that 15, the state I think was at 15.9%. We were at 15.6. So we're in the range that you would expect if you look across the state at school districts for the percent of students who are identified. That's an important number to pay attention to if you're the director of student services, because what you want to pay attention to is, are we over identifying students? Are there gaps in our universal program, whether it's reading or math? Are there places? So monitoring the health of the identification of students with exceptionality, with special education, becomes important. So I want to bring your attention to this school year. 2020-2021 is interesting because at the time that I took the numbers, the overall total number of students in Power School for the district at the time was 3,564. That's an interesting number if you look at the 3,913, because why is that number down? That number is down because of COVID-19 and the pandemic and the percent of families, because if you remember, we were anticipating higher enrollments, right? So that number is an important number for me in terms of special ed because it's going to tell part of the story in a minute. The 2019-2020 number did not go up to what was anticipated to be, somewhere around 4,000 or more than that. Instead, it dropped a bit. And that is because we've had students whose families had to make tough decisions about not coming to the public school back in the fall because school wasn't open fully, whatever was in place wasn't going to work for them, or they made that decision to do an alternative. The number of students with IEPs is interesting to me though. Last year we had 685 students with IEPs. Now we have 746. So yes, you become curious. Why is that? Well, part of the answer is because if you divide those numbers, the percentage is going to be higher because there are less general ed students this year right now than there are students with IEPs. So one could surmise that most of the students who did not out of that number from the 3,913 that dropped down to 3,564, those were not students who had IEPs. Those students came to school. Okay. Additionally, you could ask yourself the question, are we identifying more students because of COVID? Are students looking like they have bigger gaps? Students who might not have been identified prior to COVID-19 and 11 months now of not being in a traditional school year, access to teachers all the time. I would say that's at play too. And when I talk to other directors around the state and at our monthly directors meeting with the Department of Ed, those numbers are on the rise across the state and school districts. That's a national issue too. It's starting to happen. More students are getting identified because we don't know what the new sort of normal or what general education students look like, because we're not post-COVID yet. But what's happening is students are being referred to special education teams and they have gaps, which you would anticipate students would have gaps if they haven't had access to the full education that was provided in our school district prior to March 13th. So that's a number that I will continue to monitor. And if you look at it, even with the preschool taken out, it's still up. So there's a story here, and that's a story that I'm looking at, but I thought that was important for us to take a look at. So despite the fact that we have an additional number of students who came into the district, that's not the reason that we have an increase in the special ed budget this year. That increase is directly related to that ESY program. So when I met with the budget liaison team, we talked a lot about this. So this current school year's budget is $12,692,000. Excuse me, $12,692,108,000. Okay, that's going to go up to 12,978.67, 20.25. And the reason for that increase, there is in that increase, part of that, and it's not a big chunk, is a increase in the cost of related services. So related services are things like your speech and language services, which we contract out for. Okay, they're not part of our MTA contract. There are a few across the district, but the bulk of special education related services, 95% of them are contracted out to outside contractors and vendors. So there is expected to be an increase in that because those companies have signaled to me that they are planning on increasing. The last few years, the two big providers had kept their costs frozen, and they're now anticipating that they need to increase their costs. So that there's a piece of that in here. There is no increased costs in relation to adding teachers or adding paraeducators, even though our numbers of students who are identified has gone up. That has not been a focus area because we have been able to meet that obligation. That increase, the significant increase, is related to if we are going to continue in the pandemic, you will continue to have kids who have a gap, even if we're able to provide Zoom speech or Zoom PT or Zoom OT for all those students who are in our remote community or in the hybrid community. They're now able to get live related services, but we had a long period of time where they weren't able to get those. So we have that issue there. So the need for increased number of hours of related service units. So the number in the IEP, so we're obligated by law as an LEA to put our fiscal backing behind what's written into all of the IEPs across the district. And then in addition to that, I have to anticipate or predict what other costs we would include there in terms of that. So this budget reflects that. So those two things, the need for increased related service hours, speech, OT, PT, that the BCBA hours. So those are our behavioral consultants, the people who provide services to our students who have autism or who have very complicated low incidence disabilities, our students who have significant emotional disabilities receive services through registered behavioral technicians who need to be supervised by BCBAs. those costs are reflected because we're going to need more of those hours. In addition to that, in my introduction, I shared with you that we plan on running a much longer summer program, not because, oh, it's a good idea, but because we need to. We had students who went for several months without actual live services, and our plan would be to offer those services live to students this summer, which will be great because we weren't able to do that last summer. And additionally, for those families who would need to remain remote, we would continue to offer those service remotely to those students. So that would be the plan moving forward. So this budget reflects that increase of, it's a little under $400,000 to take care of that and ensure that we can meet our obligation. I just shared with you what caused that increase, so it's actually a little under 300,000. It's this ESY program and the additional costs related to COVID-19 and our need to provide what we could call here compensatory education, those services that we weren't able to provide in a manner that would allow a student to make progress forward. We are obligated to provide that now. So it's sort of like that promissory note. What I couldn't do for you before, we're going to be able to do for you now or in the summer. So that would reflect those additional costs that's in the budget that I put before you tonight. I want to add that just like last year when I brought this to your attention, the other thing that you're going to notice in this budget is there are places or lines where it looks like numbers dramatically went down or numbers went up dramatically. What we actually did is we took some time. I worked with Mark and Matt, and we took some time to move things that had been placed in other budget lines. So for example, in some of our lines, our BCBA services, which we contract, so ABA, RBT, BCBA, which are all services related to supporting students' behavioral communication supports. We took those students traditionally would have gone out of district. So that money back when these services began in the district, they were actually in the lines with the out of district lines. So in the past, those services would have been embedded in the cost of out of district because those monies would have been spent placing those students. But instead of moving them out of the district, we kept them in the least restrictive environment and provided the services in district that would have been served out of district. Additionally, services like the school liaison social workers, our neuropsychological services, vision services, hearing services, physical therapy, all of those things were on multiple lines. But what we've done this year to try to, like, as we've evolved in student services, what we've tried to do is place those in the budget that before you, and moving forward, they're clearly in lines that match up to what those services actually are, because all of these services are actually contracted services, right? Or related services. So now they're all embedded in those lines. They don't constitute an increase in cost. They just moved out of other lines. So some of you may have seen that when you went through the budget, like, wow, this budget line went down dramatically, and then this one went up significantly. They did not result in a change in cost. There's no delta in terms of there's a big increase or decrease. It actually was just simply moving money that's going to be expended from one line to another so that it's set in the line that reflects the kind of service that it is. So that's kind of what this is talking about here. We have continued to provide that wide array of consultative and collaborative supports and services and expertise. And that has created the conditions that allow us to keep our students in our school district, which is the least restrictive environment. It's the community where they and their families live, and that's where we want them. We have continued to have a decrease in the number of students that are placed out of district. We are down 4 more students this year. So I had shared last year, over the past 10 years, John had worked really hard bringing in all of these supports and services to really create an in-district option that historically or in other districts would be out of district placements that are incredibly expensive. We have been able to move from students in the 50 to 70 range on any given year 10, 12 years ago to between anywhere as low as 24 to 30 students in placements depending on the school year now. So those are good investments, as I said last year, because we're keeping our students in our school district. And this just talks to that. And that is directly linked to the supports and services that we have in the IEP. Future considerations, because this was something that came up when I met with the liaisons. Obviously, our Real Academy, so that remote education academy for learning. We have had some very robust learning going on there for some students with educational disabilities, and we want to keep up that work moving forward and thinking about how we can expand and think forward thinking in special education, supporting kids in that remote platform for those that it works for. Additionally, the Canvas platform for families who have children with IEPs. This is incredibly helpful to have a universal platform across our school district. So working with Nancy Rose and the principals across the district to ensure that for families in our district, there is coherence across our system. So it doesn't matter what school your child's in, you as a parent or as a student or as a faculty member, you can access information and share in the same way, and you don't have to learn a new way depending on the building you're working with. Understanding by design, we continue to work on that in our ELCs with John. Our curriculum instruction and technology team that I sit on with John and Nancy. So we are constantly looking at that interconnectedness between the curriculum we're teaching, how we instruct students, and the technological supports that we can use for all students and our students with disability. Because the more skilled we become in these areas, the more our students with educational disabilities will thrive in the general ed setting, and potentially the less time they have to spend outside of those settings. UDL, Universal Design for Learning. We are collaborating with higher learning institutions, so universities and colleges, looking at how we can help our workforce, so paraeducators and or teachers get degrees, become educators, support our district in helping paraeducators, for example, become special education teachers, so that we can keep a pipeline of highly qualified people coming into our district. That our work with response to intervention will continue. And again, response to intervention is working with kids on the general education side to close the gaps before you have gaps that are so big that a student requires specialized instruction and services. The more we can do that, the better for them. Continuing our work this year, we're in our first year of having a coordinator for our system of care and learning supports. That whole work around that interconnected system of care, which is our academic supports, our behavioral supports, and our supports for social emotional learning. And then finally, working on restorative practices and discipline, because we know when kids aren't in school and they're suspended, or they're out of school or in isolated settings in a school, like an in-school suspension setting, they don't have access to the general curriculum and learning. So the more we can develop practices that help kids with those lagging skills and help them so that they are successful in those settings, down the road, you would potentially have less costs in placing kids out of district or bringing in other supports. So these are just a few of the things that the liaison group asked me to mention tonight to share with you guys. So that's the end of this presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. And I hope
Naomi.
this was helpful.
Naomi?
Not too long.
Yes.
Do you or your liaison colleagues have anything to add?
Yeah, just a little bit here. I wanted to say, first of all, Heather, thank you very much. One of the things that became clear when we were talking as a group and was important to me personally is that I think it's very easy for people looking at the budget to conceptualize a school building and the things that happen there and why they cost money. But people don't necessarily conceptualize special education quite so easily. And so the context can be important when we're talking about such what looks like a really large chunk of change. And the breadth of the things that it does. As a group, we talked a lot about the school year and the way that that's creatively making students whole in this time of very strange learning. One thing that we talked about that you didn't mention is that you've been working quite hard on negotiations to make sure that we're not overpaying some of the specialists who provide services to the district, and that sounds wonderful. And we also talked about the line adjustments, and I wanted to make sure that people understand that this is a zero-sum piece and that the numbers are available for you to see that it is zero-sum line to line if you're curious to see that it works out that way. Because it's difficult to look at the budget book and actually understand that that genuinely does measure out. So if anybody has questions, we can certainly pursue that as well. Other folks who were on the liaison team, would you care to weigh in with anything?
I would also add that one of the things that Heather's been working really hard on is streamlining those services across the schools. So it's consistent for the students as they move up through the district and their IEP teams change over the schools. She's worked really hard on making sure every team member is totally on board with what their role is and how that works, and be very consistent for the students. That also is just a long-term, a money saving piece, because you have people really engaged and bought into what their role is. And so we don't have turnover in those areas. And I would just second what Naomi said. Yeah, it's kind of a big increase, but when you realize that we're offering double or a little bit more of the summer education, then it makes perfect sense. Added to that, that what she's done is reduced costs in as many areas as possible and renegotiate those contracts. That has actually been a savings so that we can offer this extended summer program.
Anyone else from our group? Jordan? Dan?
All right, we'll open it up to comments from the committee members.
I have something, Chuck.
Go right ahead, Carol.
Right, two different things. One is throughout your presentation, both in the book and what you just verbally presented, I heard a lot of references to IEPs. I heard virtually no mention of 504 plans. So is 504 plans being sort of lumped in there and just not mentioned, or is the cost impact of that a whole separate thing?
So
Carol, 504 plans are part of the regular.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Heather. They're part of regular education.
Yeah, I was
that wouldn't be the purview of Heather.
Okay, I got you. I didn't realize that. All right. And then my other question is, and this is hard. I'm hoping you can have just kind of a broad concept of it. I'm assuming both for general ed students and special education students that there is some degree of them falling behind because of the impacts of COVID, and whether they're fully remote or hybrid or whatever they are. That
Oh my, Carol.
It's frozen in time.
Chuck, you may want to go on and then come back to her.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
While we are on the subject of 504s, somewhere in Heather's presentation, I heard something about a new position for coordinating.
So Chuck, that was last year. The district added the coordinator of care,
Okay,
facilitator.
But not,
it's not a new position this year.
There are no student services budgetary concerns relative to 504s.
Let me respond to that, because Mark's correct in saying that that is not within my purview, and that's on the general ed side. However, having said that, and I did talk about this with the liaison group, so I apologize. You can spend up to 15% of a special education budget. You can allocate those resources to general education. So whether a student has a 504 plan or has no IEP, there are services that are being funded through the special education office or student services, right? Because that's broader than special education, that will serve students with 504 plans, that will serve our Title I students, that will serve our general education students, right? Or other students who may be at risk. For example, a student who has attendance problems, working with those school liaisons, who is a social worker, making the connection with the teaching team, making a connection with the family to help that student and family and that teaching team develop a plan help the child and family develop systems at home, right? Go to the home. That's one of the beauties of social workers, helping the school team understand what's happening with the family and build bridges, right? And pathways to learning. So in all actuality, a lot of the services that we offer separate from things like direct units of speech and language, physical therapy, a neuropsychologist coming and consulting with a team around a student who has a very complex disability. Many of the special education services, those special ed teachers may actually pull students in to a special ed resource group, whether that's served in a regular classroom or during some kind of, what I need time or intervention time. They may work with students who have IEPs or who don't, who have 504 plans or who don't. So when we talk about student services, we're talking about more than IEPs. At the end of the day, we are obligated to implement all of those IEPs and ensure that they're met. But beyond that, this budget encompasses services that support universally all of our students.
Unmute.
Chuck? Chuck, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Carol.
Yeah, unfortunately, my computer connection dropped, so I just now came back, so I missed whatever I missed. If you bear with me, so I can restate my question, and if it was already...
If you can just hang on a minute, Carol.
Yep, I'll do that.
Okay. Heather just gave us a rather complete overview of how everybody has synergy between special services and IEPs and special education and so forth. But I would like to go back to Mark if I could. I don't see my, what am I doing wrong here? I don't see my,
I lost everybody too, Chuck. I can't see anyone else anymore. Something happened.
Chuck, look in your lower left corner and see if your video camera picture is down there, and you can click on that.
lower left corner says,
do you see the video camera?
Yes.
Just click on that. That should bring you back.
There you go.
All right. Okay. So Mark.
Yes, sir.
We understand that there's always a great deal of difficulty working between the regular classroom teacher and those that provide special services. And there's always a constant debate amongst all whose responsibility it is for special education. Although we always very nobly sit here and say, well, it's everybody's responsibility. But the practical matter is somewhat different. So when it comes to 504s, that's generally where a teacher interfaces with special education for any number of regular classroom students. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what kind of professional development have we put into the budget to build a better bridge between those regular classroom teachers that don't feel it's their responsibility, when in fact it is, to coordinate with student services?
So I appreciate the question, Chuck. I guess I'll certainly answer it, and I'll turn to John, whose responsibility 504 is now. I would just say that the premise of the question is sort of that there isn't a good interface now, and
that is definitely the premise of the question.
Right, and I would take exception to that respectfully. That I don't think that is characteristic of the way that things happen in Merrimack. Now, having said that, there are always occasions where there's something that slips through the cracks in a district our size, for sure. But we have highly skilled, highly experienced 504 coordinators at each building.
So how many coordinators do we have in total?
One per building.
And how many are funded by grant?
None. So the coordinators are not exclusively 504 people. That's a function of their other roles, guidance counselors and so on.
So we haven't had any grant support for 504 coordinators?
No, at the high school for a period of time we did, and now that position is in our budget.
So the taxpayers are in fact picking up a new position that was previously supported by a grant.
About a year ago, that's true.
Well, I think that we could have a little bit more transparency about that.
About what particularly?
About how we fund positions like that. I feel like I had to drag it out of somebody.
For last year's budget, we talked about how we had to make up that the grant went away and we had to fund it fully last year. I remember us discussing it at the board level anyway.
Yeah, we did a presentation on it last year, and Christine Connor, who is the high school coordinator, presented on that last year in her role. But that was last year's budget, Chuck. It's not in this coming budget. That was over a year ago.
Well, I apologize for having such a lagging indicator of what's going on.
Chuck?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll just expand a little more.
No, we don't need any expansion. We've had a good deal of discussion on it. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.
Chuck, this is Heather. Can I add one thing?
I'd prefer not to.
I'm sorry. Sure.
I think the situation is moot at this point.
Okay.
Chuck, could I go back to my previous question
Yes, Carol, please do.
Okay. I am assuming that across the board, both general ed and special ed, that there are a certain amount of students who are falling behind because of the conditions brought about by COVID. Do you have any sense whether the special ed students are falling behind at a more significant rate than the general ed population?
Carol, what I would say to that,
I think,
and again, I would defer to Heather on that. What I would say is that at the moment, that's a difficult question to answer because we're in the middle of this crisis. I hope it's, maybe it's more than the middle, but in any event, we're no different than any other school district in that, we're going to evaluate loss as related to COVID impacts over, I'm sure the next, several years to some degree or another with regular ed and special ed. So there would be no data that I think we could reliably point to that answers that question for regular ed or special ed. But logic would dictate that some students in both categories have suffered loss, and that's no more true for Merrimack than it is for any other district. But rest assured, Heather and her team and our leadership team more broadly, is very attuned to loss, whether it's summer loss that is just typical in a summer or certainly related to this. So, those processes of evaluating loss and so on are underway and will continue to be underway, I would think, for, the next several years.
I acknowledge that you're not going to have hard data, testing and whatever where you could give us hard numbers to say how much that loss is. I was looking for more just a broad sense of whether you feel that it's having a more significant impact on the special community.
So what we did, Carol, is one of the things that came to mind, brought to bear, and I actually talked about this with the liaison as well, so I apologize for not including it. I talked a little bit about positioning ourselves for this school year that we're in right now, back in March when we went remote, and we were remote from March till June. And I was thinking, if we're going to be remote for a while or at least partially remote and fully remote for some for a long time. What could we put in, what could we bring to bear? What could we put in place that would support educators, special educators working with kids with educational disabilities that would allow us to progress monitor? So my answer was going to be, you can't really answer that right now because you're right. We don't have big high stakes data, big assessments looking at the general ed population, looking at special education populations, but we do have progress monitoring. So we bought Goal Book. We had Goal Book accounts. John had it here in the district. We bought it for every special educator because one of the things about Goal Book is that software has more than just, it used to be just kind of an IEP writing tool. It has a gigantic, and when I say gigantic, I'm talking like 128,000 files that support everything from SEL to decoding to anything that could possibly transition services, anything that could possibly be in an IEP that would allow special educators not only to have those resources for writing IEPs, but would have that gigantic library of resources to use in instruction, whether that's live or remote. And the best part is they had the progress monitoring tools that can be used live or remotely to track student progress so that teachers could reliably be monitoring how students are doing in relation to those IEP goals so that we can keep them from falling further behind. So that special ed team, right? A special ed team has to meet at least once annually, but that team could convene anytime someone's doing that progress monitoring cycle and a student's not making adequate progress. The team could convene and either, right, you can intensify the services, you could add more time, you could look at other services or interventions, right? So that allows us, we have been able to, even in the fully remote world, been able to progress monitor how kids were doing, which was really hard from March to June in that completely remote world. But we've made it so there are tools. And of course, when kids are live in the school, even if they're only half the week live, you have that opportunity to do that as well. So although we don't know what the lasting effects of this pandemic are on our general population or our special ed population, we have been monitoring the health of those IEPs and student progress related to those. And those individual special ed teams would be convening if students aren't making progress as we're moving through this year, even if we're remote.
I guess then my follow on to that would be, compared to other years, are you seeing that your special ed population is lagging more than you would have expected in a traditional year?
I'm not seeing that, actually. I would answer this with the caveat that Mark answered. There's a part of this that there are some kids for whom this is so disruptive to them that it's very hard for them to learn. And we continue to meet, special ed teams continue to meet to figure that piece out for those children. But remarkably, there have been a lot of success stories about children who have been able to access learning remotely when you, for example, if a student is in a general ed Zoom, there may be a special education teacher, para supporting them, who then goes to a breakout room with that child and supports them, even though they're not in the same space, they're remote, can help that child do that work so that they can continue to make progress in that general ed classroom. That's an example. We have students who, since school started in September, I made the starting point for special education. Whatever we decided for all our kids, that's where we start for special ed. So students with educational disabilities, many of them came to school 4 days a week or 3 days a week or 2 days fully and 2 days half, so they could get additional special education and get live related services for those kids coming in. We have also done things like pushed services into homes, which normally you would never do that. That would be the most restrictive setting in special education, but we did not view that as a special education change of placement. We related that to COVID. So for children who could not access the Zooms and could not come to school because of medical reason or someone in their family, we actually pushed support into the home to support the child with the Zooming and with education there. So we have worked really hard since March to tailor or streamline the special education for our students to the individual student working with their family. So I don't overall see that our students with special education needs are lagging. And when you looked at the report it came out from the DOE in the fall, Merrimack, in terms of satisfaction of parents and some of the other indicators that was done on that survey, was higher than some of the other districts around. And I would definitely say part of that was due to the special ed teams in our schools and our school teams and families working really hard together to create the just right conditions in a pandemic, right? In the not even close to optimal setting, and found pathways for kids to learning. And we continue to do that, and we will continue to do that into the future as long as this lasts during it and after, because that's what we do.
Are there any other board committee comments? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Heather. We very much appreciate your comprehensive and thorough explanation of student services.
And thank you so much for having me tonight. You all take good care and stay safe and healthy.
And we can move on to maintenance. Tom Tussaud. And Brian was the principal liaison there.
Yep. And
it's in your hands, Brian.
All right. So Tom did ask that we go first. So we met with Mr. Tussaud over Zoom. And the general gist of the maintenance budget for this year is that most of the lines were level funded. The exception being that all of the large items, so these would be the CIP items, have been pushed out. So none of those large CIP items are in the budget. This year, they've been pushed out 1 year. That Tom was very confident that is not an issue, pushing it out 1 year. We did talk about if it became a habit of pushing it out year after year. Obviously, at some point, we're going to start having stuff fail, and the cost of doing that is going to be greater than any savings year over year. But if we do it 1 year because of the economic uncertainty and the economic pain right now, because the district has kept up on maintenance over the years, we have the flexibility to do that for 1 year, as long as we don't go, oh, it didn't hurt us this time, and we make a habit of it. If we do that, then we'll start to have some problems. But right now, it won't be an issue. In terms of the level funding, the unpredictable nature of things with COVID, some of the actuals versus budget, or budget versus actual values have been off, but that's because of COVID having impacts on hours that people need to work and the wear and tear on equipment. It makes it really difficult to forecast. So the budget items have been level funded other than those CIP items.
Thank you, Brian. Any of your liaison colleagues like to address anything?
Gillian and Carol?
Seeing none, we'll open it up to committee member comments. Would anybody like to comment on the maintenance budget? Tom, you did a great job.
Well, thank you very much.
I would like to take this opportunity, however, to say that Tom made a very explicit point that he does not particularly care for deferring capital improvement items because they may well, in fact, have a tendency to stack up. And I think that as a larger rich story for the school district, I think that may well be the case. I certainly have followed the school district over a number of years, and I know there are things that need to be done. And
I think, did everybody lose Chuck's audio there briefly?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Chuck, for some reason, we don't have your audio.
they're probably grateful for that, Nancy.
No, you're back now. You're back.
All right. I'm simply urging the school board to take to heart Tom's belief in not putting off capital improvement programs, because we have here in the district, we are falling behind on our capital improvement programs, and we always justify it by saying, well, this isn't a good year, or we don't want to mess with this right now, or we'll do that next year, or whatever. But as I said, I've been following the school district for a number of years, and it is quite apparent to me that we may never catch up if the school board, quite frankly, doesn't come to some vision for the future and begin acting upon it. So my admonition to the school board would be to stop deferring capital improvement projects and excusing them as some kind of wish list. They are directly connected to our master plan, which is directly connected to our zoning, and our economy. And it's not a simple thing to simply defer something on the capital improvement program. It's not a wish list.
And Chuck, we did spend a good bit of time in the liaison meeting discussing exactly that point. And that was where Tom's feedback, and please feel free, Tom, if I'm misrepresenting anything, to correct me. But my understanding from our liaison meeting was, given the particulars this year, that this is a particularly tough time economically, that 1 year is not a problem. If we're having the same conversation this time next year, then we're starting to have problems building. If we're having the same conversation in 2 years, we're really in trouble and we are sabotaging ourselves. But right now, as long as we understand that and we don't fall back on the same thing next year, we have 1 year of breathing room. We probably don't have a lot more than that. Is that a fair representation, Tom?
Yes, I believe that is exactly how I feel. We are in a good situation this year as far as deferring, but the future is yet to be written. So we're hoping that this is a 1 year situation for all of us. I did want to mention one thing before I forgot it. It was something mentioned to me by Carol Lang, and it talked about, we mentioned earlier at one point in some meeting, or maybe, I'm not sure if it was myself or Matt, we talked about we were running ventilation 24/7 at this point in time to bring as much air into the building as we can. I want to ensure everybody that does not mean that we are not still going back to night setbacks and temperature controls in the building. We're just trying to bring extra air and bring quality air into our buildings at all times. And that's all I have.
Yeah, if I could add, that was a recommendation of the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, that if you have a central HVAC system, that you do run it 24 hours a day. We used to start it up, I think, Tom, you said like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and then shut it down in the evening. But, you know, the ventilation system's running, but we're not running the buildings at like 70 degrees, you know, so we're still doing, that's what when Tom says night setbacks, that's what he means. We're still setting back the temperature. We're just running the fans and the exhaust and the ventilators where we have ventilation.
Well, Tom, we appreciate the good job you do. And I appreciate you being a man of few words. And everybody seems to be happy enough with the maintenance budget. One last time, are there any committee members' comments about the maintenance budget? Seeing none, we will move on. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.
Library technology. Gee whiz, I wonder who we have here that will talk to that. Oh, Nancy Rose and Lee French was the principal liaison on that. Lee, would you like to take this?
Lee is not here, Chuck, but I
Ah,
can hand things off to Nancy Rose to speak about.
oh, and Mackenzie, it's always good to see you.
You as well, Chuck.
Nancy, love to hear from you.
Thanks, Mackenzie. So I met with Mackenzie and Lee early. I guess that was like, I'm so lost. My world is askew because of travel. It was last week. And I just gave a very quick overview of my budget. Mostly my budget is sort of just an ongoing sustainment of programs. The software line is a little up this year, which is reflective of software we've been able to acquire using title funds this year that we would like to keep going next year. My infrastructure budget is actually down, and there were questions from the school board about both infrastructure and repairs. And essentially, there was a request from the school board to focus on a one-to-one initiative, a one device per student initiative. And so we have suggested part of the budget message to the school board was to put that as a warrant article, which is where that currently stands. And then we were able to leverage both federal title money and I guess the CARES and also some state aid money to do some major overhauling and infrastructure where we were able to upgrade all of the wireless access points, cabling and fiber cabling in all of the buildings. So we took advantage of that. And so because of that, didn't have to budget for as much there. And then with the repairs, it isn't in my budget, but there is a request for an additional technician position. The question was about why there wasn't a reflection of a repair line someplace in my budget to reflect the addition of devices, both that we've acquired up to this point, but that we would if we were able to do the one-to-one program. And that is because student device repairs are largely done by technicians. So we may acquire parts or we may be doing service work that's provided by the vendor who we got the device from, but they have to manage that if it's packing up and shipping or installing parts, but that's the labor piece that we need to have in place. So those were really the sort of the distinguished, the standout differences. So we talked about that and we congratulated Mackenzie on her adorable new puppy, and Lee has one on the way, a puppy. So we had a very productive meeting, and I can't think, Mackenzie, can you remember if we talked about anything else in my budget?
I think that was overall it. And I would just say that overall, we also talked about the fact that Nancy has been able to hand out several laptops to people as well. And that is my new dog in the background. And so, you know, I think she's done a great job of being able to do that, especially for people who can't afford one. So I think that's certainly a huge help, especially when mom and dad have to work and the kids are supposed to be on Zoom all day. So that's certainly has been a great help. But I think that is pretty much everything we went over during that.
Well, okay. Do we have any committee member comments relative to library services?
I have a question. Pushing the one-to-one device to a warrant article, if that warrant article were to fail, would it end up setting us back on the pre-COVID plans for where we were wanting to get to with number of devices versus students? Or would we still be on track with what we had planned or ahead of what we had planned if we put that as a warrant article instead of a budget item and it fails?
I think that we would probably be a little bit ahead because we hadn't formally focused on a one-to-one initiative per se. And with the money we used from my budget and different opportunistic funds, for lack of a better word, we used several different sources. We are closer. I haven't done a calculation as to what that ratio is at the moment, but we're closer. So the warrant article would complete that work. So we
Can
will
I-
continue to move
Can
along.
can I chime in? Nancy, you may not have been aware, the school board removed that warrant article from the proposed warrant. We haven't finished the warrant yet, but the latest draft, we chose to remove it largely because in discussions with Matt and others with anticipated funding that we think is going to come in, that we felt that utilizing that funding to get to address the one-to-one gap would be a better approach. And the main concern was if we did that warrant article the way that it is, and it was voted down by the voters, because of no means no, we likely could not purchase equipment for laptops to address one-to-one, versus if we left it off completely and were able to receive fundings, we would be able to do as far as we could. So that was discussed at the board meeting a week ago, I believe it was. So I don't know, Matt, if you want to chime in anymore, because that was part of what we discussed the last time.
Yeah, and this is kind of like the second round of COVID relief funding for schools that supposedly came from Congress to the state, but we haven't received notification from the state that it's there. So it will be there. We're not sure of the amount. I kind of did a calculation and I have an amount in my head that's probably pretty close, but I'm not willing to share that at this time. But that's well, I'm not really.
If you go to the school board minutes, you'll find that you did display a number, right?
No, you won't find it there.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, I mean, if we get those federal dollars through the state, and we have ample timing this time to expend those monies and receive the equipment in-house, we'll be able to do the one-to-one. And there was a concern that if we had a warrant article and it was voted down, because I think it was like $450,000, that's a pretty large chunk. And in this day and age, with the economy being as such, there's a very good probability that may be voted down. And so didn't want to take the chance. So if we can have other monies coming from the federal government that's not affecting the local property tax owner. We all know that we pay for it in our federal income tax, or maybe, in this case, our grandchildren will be paying for it in their federal income tax. But we thought we'd go that route. And so, it's a strategy.
Okay. So in terms of my initial question to Nancy Rose, that was the second, or the concern about if the article is voted down. That was what I was trying to ask about, is if the article is voted down, if it were to be put forward as a warrant article, whether that would be problematic, or whether, because of the extra devices already purchased with the COVID money so far, if that's put us ahead of where we expected. My understanding, unless I misunderstood, was that we're ahead of where we would have been because of the extra COVID money. So even if it was voted down, we would still be next year on track or a little ahead. In terms of the federal money, if we were to still put the warrant article out, but put it as a bonded warrant article, then the money wouldn't actually be raised unless it was needed, and then we would still have the ability to take out a bond for the money, correct? No?
Well, if you wanted to, I can't. Well, number one, you could take out a bond, but then you need more than a 50% majority. You need 3/5.
Understood. But if a bonded warrant article were proposed and passed, it wouldn't obligate the district to take out the bond. It would give the district the authority to take out the bond, correct?
Well, it would give the district the authority to take out the bond, and they could decide yes or no.
So if a bonded warrant article were passed and the grant money comes through as anticipated, then the bond would never actually need to be taken out.
Yeah, that's true.
As long as, except usually your bond articles have take a bond for X period of time for this month, and there's a first year bit of money you have to take out, so that first year, so that would need to be taken out. It wouldn't be the whole bond, but there would be a financial impact if you chose not to do the bond that you'd have to take out. that is part of the way that it's set up.
Okay, so there wouldn't be a way to create the ability to have the bond without actually committing to doing it. Not affect the tax rate if the grants come through, but if the grants don't come through, still have access to be able to move forward if the voters approve it.
Well, the first thing you need to do if you're taking out a bond, you gotta have a bond counsel. So that's probably, well, for a $400,000 bond, and I've never seen one that low. You know, you could do that, but you still have fees for legal fees to try and set this up, because with floating a bond, you have to start well in advance to get everything lined up so the bond bank can do a June sale.
Okay, so again, on the federal funding, if the federal funding comes through and that allows for still achieving the goal without raising the taxes, that's the local property taxes, that's great. If we count on that and there is some reason why that federal grant money doesn't come through, whether it's a failure at the federal or state level, where does that leave us? Are we going to have a hole in the ability to meet the district's goals because of not having budgeted the money or put out the warrant article to have the money to be able to achieve the district's goals in terms of access to devices?
Well, Nancy said we're still, as what we have in the budget now, what we've utilized from federal funds thus far, we're still on point for where we thought we would be. We would not be 1-to-1 if the article failed and the federal money didn't come through. Did I just lose everybody, or?
No, I'm not sure. I think, Brian, does that answer your question, or?
I guess I see there being kind of we would be on target for what the goal was pre-COVID, but it also sounds like the reason this warrant article was even on the table in the first place was because the goal has changed due to the changed perspectives from COVID. So to what extent it is 1-to-1 the goal of the district at this point? If that, regardless of the federal funds or no federal funds, is our goal 1-to-1, or is that not a settled goal yet?
So if I could speak to that, Brian. So the board has said for some time that, you know, I believe I can speak for the board on this, that has been a goal, particularly more recently. And in fact, in its budget message to administration, that was something that was expressed by members of the board, and that along with a few other things became the basis for our organizational approach to the development of the budget this year. And that was precipitated, I think, you know, we've been talking about 1-to-1 for a number of years, but that particularly was precipitated by what happened with COVID, when we learned how much that mattered to have students be able to have access to that. So that was the reason for putting it forward, for reasons that we've discussed publicly and in my message. This did not appear to be the year that we wished to ask the taxpayers through the budget to fund that, opting instead to allow the taxpayer to make a choice as to whether or not that would be something that they would support as part of their goals for their community. And so that was, and I believe still remains, a goal of the district. And it is also true that if federal funds were to come and we were to put it on a warrant, no means no, and we couldn't use the federal funds for that. So that was the board's rationale, which is understandable, for taking it out. But I believe that is still our goal. And to the point that Nancy made earlier, we have made tremendous progress toward that end. And I think that, we will march in that direction. So that is our goal.
Okay,
Could I ask a clarifying question of Mark or Nancy on that?
certainly, go ahead, Lori.
Since this is my first year on the committee, is that one-to-one goal for students and families need, want, or every student is going to be issued a laptop one day, or let's say if we have this money come in?
The goal would be for every student to have a device that is consistent across all students. Well, not necessarily all students. We might select a device at the lowest levels, more like an iPad or a tablet. But so that all the students in the common learning environment would have the same thing, because it just makes for a more consistent environment. It's easier to support. It's better for teachers' ability to work with that technology in the classroom. So that would be the goal.
You all set, Lori?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, are there any other committee questions? Well, thank you very much.
Carol,
I think Carol's
muted.
talking.
Yeah, Carol's on mute.
Carol? Carol, are you there?
Yeah, hold on, let me see if I can unmute her. Oh, I can only, yeah, there we go.
I think can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I had a follow-on for Matt and then a question for Nancy. On the no means no, does that apply to any warrant article, whether it's bonded or not?
Yes.
Okay. So I definitely then understand the school board's point of view on that. And then for Nancy, my question was, when the schools are closed, whether it be some of the schools, all of the schools, whatever, what function are librarians and library aides filling during that time period?
So the librarians are teaching. They're actually part of the instructional team, and they're also doing a lot of the professional development around the implementation of Canvas, acquisition of resources and sites that are getting used in instruction. Their role shifts a little bit in how they deliver it, but what they're doing is sort of an ongoing, it's redefined, but they're very busy. I can attest. It's been hard to get to meet with them. The assistants are continuing to do tech support, and a lot of the support to families has been done by the assistants at the school level because they are known within their buildings by families. They also have been continuing to do work in the buildings as far as we do device swap outs and things like that. So a lot of tech support. The other thing that we do have going on is well, now that students are back, obviously teachers are back, but during remote learning, many of our teachers were working in the buildings doing their Zoom sessions from the school, which requires some ongoing support with technology and the instructional technology, like integrating and document cameras and different ways to communicate with students.
Okay, that sounds good.
Device distribution. The library assistants are primarily the front line for device distribution.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Nancy, thank you very much for enlightening us.
Thanks for the time.
You know, you do such a great job. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. That's very kind.
So now we have probably the shortest of all. We're going to discuss the district-wide budget. So, Jordan, you want to deliver that, or?
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is what we've done in the past, which is, hand it over to Matt to dig in. I'll just give my overview and repeat for those that are kind of going through this for the first time or watching at home that the district-wide budget incorporates a lot of things that we can't control. And Matt will certainly dig into that. But this is where things like, salary contracts and benefits and retirement. This is an area where we get some numbers from the state. Sometimes they're estimates, sometimes they're maximums, like the retirement contributions. But this is a budget where we don't really have a lot of control of what's happening here. But we certainly have to be aware of it and prepare for it. So I think really the most applicable thing to do here is for me to give it to Matt and let him dig in and explain why, there are some pretty significant changes in this part of the budget, but as he will explain, these aren't things that we can choose to affect. If claims have gone up in dental, then it's possible our rates go up. Same thing with health insurance, and then again with retirement, that's something that we kind of get the number from the state. So, Matt, I think that's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. First, I'd like to, this isn't a PowerPoint, it's a spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets. So I'm just gonna share mine with you. Let's see, let's make it look like this here. Share. See if I can work with that. This is the budget that was presented to you. You see, it's $1,173,000 more than last year, or 1.45%. This is given everything that you have heard tonight, and the district being the last portion of that. So this includes all the schools. Each school was essentially level funded. Library media services was level funded. Maintenance was level funded. The only thing that went up a little bit was I think food service was actually a little bit of a decrease. It was a $2,600 decrease in that budget. So essentially, you're looking at a 1.173 increase in the operating budget, and it's basically residing in the district level. Now, what happened to this budget since you received it is the school board went through it and made a series of some minor cuts. Basically, they looked at the Brentwood facility that we have, and the number that was in there for utilities was to actually run that building as a facility that would be used day to day, but that's not going to be the case. So we're just going to keep that building alive, and so we just put in the minimum amount that we would need to keep that building alive and being able to be occupied on a limited use basis. Basically what it's become is a training site for the Merrimack Police Department. We let them use it for any kind of drills, scenarios, training they want to, and they appreciate it, and we're happy to have that building there for them to utilize. So that's the short-term utilization of that facility. So $12,300 was reduced from the operating budget, giving us a 1.44% increase. So we're looking at a budget of 81,875, 163. So that's the overview of everything you have seen this evening. Also, just so you know, the proposed budget, the new one of 81,875, is actually lower than the default budget by $43,000. So essentially, this would be your budget warrant article, to raise this amount. If it fails, this amount would come into play. So you're asking, well, what makes up that 161? Well, a lot of things do. Teaching salaries. 3 years ago, we passed a teacher's contract, had a 3.25% increase in it. The actual amount in the warrant article was $911,000, but we only needed $189,000 to give everybody their contracted increase, because we've had quite the turnover in staff over the last 3 years. I think this past year, going into the year we're in, we had a changeover of around 10% of our teaching staff, or almost 35 teachers come and go. So we've had a lot of retirees, and we've had a lot of newbies coming in, which is always nice to see. This year's probably no exception, but we'll have to wait to see how that plays out. The next thing is health insurance. We have to, by contract, provide health insurance to our employees at a specified rate. We had a 9.3% guaranteed maximum rate increase. The actual increase to the budget was lower because 9.3% of what was budgeted for is probably closer to $1 million. But because we had a change in the demographic of who's taking the single plan, the family plan, the two-person plan, which happens every year, we were able to stay with this commitment, this contractual obligation, and it increased the budget by around $500,000. We have FICA, which is just based on wages. And then we have two other items, the New Hampshire retirement for the support staff, and then the New Hampshire retirement for the teachers' staff. The rate for the support staff increased from 11% to 14%. You know, that's quite an increase. You know, it's 3 points, but it's 3 points on, let's say, $7-8 million. The New Hampshire retirement for the teaching staff increased around 3 points, from 17.8 to 21.02. Years ago, as I said in our liaison meeting, the state of New Hampshire used to supplement this rate, and to balance the state's budget, they backed out of that some odd 30-year-old agreement and participation in the New Hampshire retirement plan for teachers, for support staff, for police, and for fire. If we were looking at the town budget right now, I'm sure the rates for the town for police and fire are probably 27% of salary and maybe close to 30% of salary. So it's quite a big ticket in our operating budget, and a couple of points moves the needle significantly. We did have some reductions over here. The $6 million bond that was taken out for, I bet you nobody even knows what the high school, well, you guys do, a few of you know what the high school addition is. It's the 3-story addition where the main office is. I still call it the new main office, but where the main office is. That was a $6 million bond, and it was taken out at the time to keep the payments, I guess, as low as possible back in 1999 for 20 years. So this is the year that we're not paying anything for it. So it actually helps us out to the good with the savings of $295,000 in principal and $45,000 in interest. Just as a note, the middle school bond, which was also a 20-year bond, will be paid off in 23-24, which is coming up pretty shortly. So that's going to decrease our operating budget by another $750,000 plus. So Carol Lang had a question too, and I didn't want to forget it. So I sent you an email, Carol, and I just wanted, she was talking about what our legal expenses were, because you noticed that in the budget backup, we had an expenditure this year of $90,000. If you go way down here, $90,000 right in that area. And, you know, that was an aberration. We had some legal cases that happened that we had to defend ourselves against. Mark could perhaps give you more detail. I don't want to really talk about what is included in that number, but it does jump around. You know, 10 years ago it was 20,000. That was a light year. And then it went up to 68, 32. It's kind of hard to predict as a target because it's all kind of contingent upon not how often we consult with the attorney, because we just do it on an as needed basis, but it's basically driven by, you know, what legal costs we incur by those who have filed against us in some fashion or another. Or if there's, you know, special years like when the budget committee was disbanded because the town charter took it away, and does the school district still have a budget committee or not? You know, that was a year where the legal fees were kind of high because we were getting opinions and everything like that. But even though you have ups and downs and it's hard to pin, you know, when you go over 10 years, it averages out to around 51,000. And what do we have in the budget? We've got 50 grand. So essentially we're pretty close. but as you can see, it can jump around. So these are the big drivers in the district budget. They're all contractual. And this is basically where we are right now. So I am going to stop the share, and I will answer any questions you have at this time, or Mark can comment, or John Fabrizio, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, can comment also. So I'll turn it over to Mark and John at this point. We also have an item in here that I know Mark's going to mention. It's a $100,000 contingency fund. So, and that was something that, you were talking about the school board and budgeting for food, and that's not in the operating budget. Well, as you were saying that, it just came to mind that, that could be another thing for this contingency amount that is in the budget for COVID relief funds. So I'll turn it over to Mark and John right now and sit back and enjoy the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I actually would just invite questions and happy to take whatever the committee would like to ask.
So, Matt, you brought up the contingency funding and the lunch, and I understand that you probably won't have a exact answer to this tonight because we need to look at the numbers. But I would love to know if there's enough money in that contingency to cover what the cost of the lunches would be if the federal funding does dry up. So that if that's the plan, then we have a plan. That's great. But if that's the plan and it's not enough funds to cover what the shortfall would be, then that would be worrisome.
So Brian, I can say that the contingency fund did not contemplate lunch. No. That was not the plan. The reason that we put a contingency line in the budget is because at this point it is not possible to fully anticipate what needs we might encounter as we go into the next school year that arise from COVID. So it could be food. It also could be a need to purchase additional PPE that we, hadn't anticipated because of a second, or not a second, but, an additional need due to whatever arises. I mean, I think we've learned this year to be prepared for anything. It could also be tutoring support to provide supports to students who have suffered some kind of educational loss, whether that would be, after school, on the weekends, and so on. So we thought that it was necessary to have a sum of money that we could use for a variety of purposes that would reveal themselves over time that we couldn't completely anticipate. And what we said to the board is that we would understand if the board would want us to present a need as it arose that would be subject to that particular line, and present the board with the need, so that there'd be very public and open, and that the community would understand what the need is and why we're asking for funds from that. And as is always the case, if we don't need to expend any of that money, it would be returned to the taxpayer. So it didn't contemplate food. That isn't the reason it was developed, but it doesn't exclude that as one of the purposes that might, reveal itself over time as, the primary need. As far as whether it would cover the cost, I don't think, as Matt was alluding to earlier, I don't think that we have fully calculated, what that might be. But that's certainly something that, if we were directed to by the board or whatever, that we could, kind of calculate or extrapolate, what that might what that sum might be. But anyway, there would be a range of uses for that money that would be food, but a lot of other things as well.
Absolutely understood on it's a contingency, so it's not for a single purpose. It's money to use when it's needed. What I was trying to say was if one potential use of that contingency would be funding food, but the projected food cost would be larger than the amount that was in the contingency fund, then that would be a problem unless it sounded like the first part of what you were saying, and please tell me if I'm interpreting this correctly, is to a certain extent, the contingency fund is there's some money in it, but mostly it's a placeholder and the money would need to be pulled from somewhere else if there really were a major contingency. Is that an accurate understanding?
I think that's true. And that's not unlike what would happen, in other scenarios. Matt does an outstanding job of making, taking care of our money and making sure that, rules are followed and also that, there's opportunities to find savings in individual lines that might be collected and then put towards another place, but always again with the board, knowledgeable and so on. So yes, that wouldn't be terribly different than what often happens in non-COVID times.
Okay, so to follow on from that, we're already trimming a lot of things, like the easy things to do are already being trimmed out, like deferring maintenance. So if there is a major contingency, we are in a time when there's a very good possibility of there being a major contingency next year. Has the administration and or the board started to look at where would we be able to shift money in the budget if there really is a significant contingency that necessitates it, where there might be room to make a painful choice that's the least painful possible? Or are we waiting for that to happen and then having to make that decision under duress at the time when federal funding just dried up, or we just had a new bat infestation in a wall that nobody imagined, because there are a lot more contingencies that could happen right now with everything going on. So has there been any planning on kind of where money could be shifted from, since we're already leaning this out so much that it's a lot, there's fewer places to look?
Well, if I can take this, Mark, there are two areas that we have capital reserve funds that have well over $500,000 each in them. One is special ed. So if we get an out of district placement that we're not expecting or anything like that, and it taxes the special ed budget, we can pull from there. And then, you mentioned my least favorite topic whatsoever, the bat mitigation we had a few years ago. There was quite a bit of money that we did get from the state. The total cost of the job was $600,000, but we got 80% of it from the state because there was an infrastructure fund there. But we do have a capital reserve fund for maintenance. This past year, on last year's ballot, there was a warrant article for $150,000 going into that. So that brings up the total in that fund to another $500,000. So we do have contingencies if a boiler would go or something like that, or if we had a sped out of district placement. So, but we haven't combed through the budget to take a look at what areas we may or may not have savings in right now. Or the proposed budget, yes.
So given that we are trimming, like, again, going back on the deferred maintenance, we're pushing anywhere where there's room to save, which there's a lot of people who are struggling right now. So it's good that we're trying to keep the budget as lean as possible. Are those capital reserves adequate given the level of risk we have in keeping the budget so lean? Are those capital reserves going to be adequate for the reasonably foreseeable amount of risk that we have next year?
I would say so, yes. I don't hesitate.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with Matt. I very much appreciate the question and the concern that the question speaks to. And I would just point out that we didn't present a budget to the board that we didn't think was a highly defensible budget to provide the opportunity to, you know, maximize education, safety, technology, you know, our primary goals for this year. You know, we didn't put forth a budget that we didn't think was going to provide us, you know, with the ability to deliver a quality education next year. Had we felt that there were particular areas that we needed to boost, we certainly would have done that, even despite the, you know, clear strain on many families, and we would have let the chips fall. So I just would like to try to reassure that the budget we put forth, you know, is not a how can I say it? It's not an also ran kind of a budget in our mind. It's a responsible budget given our needs right now. And we have over the years always been able to absorb things that, you're quite right, happen out of the blue, bats being one. And we've always been able to absorb them. And I would just again say that's because of Matt's expertise and experience in, you know, managing budgets. And I don't foresee any reason that wouldn't be so this year either. We endured COVID, and, you know, we did get federal support, but, you know, that federal support was limited really primarily to COVID impacts. And so we were able to absorb other challenges that we always have with the monies that we've, you know, had in a bank, in holding like we always have. So I just would make that point.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 32 years now, both on the municipal and the school side. I've never gone over budget ever. So that's all I care to add to the conversation.
But I appreciate the question, because the question is, it's a very sensitive, I mean, it speaks to a sensitivity about need, and I really appreciate that. And I'm trying to, in my answer, I'm trying to suggest that we agree with that premise, and we've really tried to construct a budget that we think, you know, can provide an education that we that we're proud of, and that our community expects us, and that can absorb the challenges that might lie out there that we're not entirely sure what they might be.
Are there any other committee comments, questions, reflections?
I have, Chuck.
Go ahead, Carol.
Two totally separate things. One is on the legal expenditures. I'd just like to offer a comment, and if anyone from the administration wants to chime in, that's fine too. But the original reason why I asked for that analysis was the 1 year from a year prior to this, where it jumped to 90,000, jumped out at me. And I just want to make the point, while anyone with a legitimate claim has every right to bring legal action against the district if they feel there's a justification, I would never dream of denying them that right. But I also want to make the point that lawsuits incur expenses for the district. So we need to weigh the two and realize that, you know, every action has a reaction. So being judicious in bringing legal action is always a good point too, rather than driving our legal costs if it can be resolved through some other more amicable means. And then my second thing is on the Brentwood money. First off, if that cut had not been made by the school board, I would have proposed a similar cut. But secondly, I would like a little more analysis from Matt, and I'm not sure if he can pull this together quickly or not. But since we acquired that property, approximately how much have we spent, both in added utilities, insurance, etc., to support our ownership of that property?
Oh, since we've had it, I think the building probably costs us There's no real bump in the insurance. We've had it on the insurance policy for quite a bit now. And it's probably runs around, in all honesty, around $8,000 a year to keep it alive.
Yeah, just to add into we did a pretty deep analysis of that to get the actual spend rate versus what was budgeted. And the budget amount going into last year was $23,800, and the actual utilization of utilities was $7,800. So we chose a number for the budget to be enough to cover $7,800 with a little bit of leeway, but not nearly the full amount that was before. So we essentially cut it just about in half. And obviously anything not used will get returned back, but we wanted to be a more accurate budget figure.
Right, and I appreciate that. Like I said, if you guys hadn't proposed that cut, I would have. But my other underlying point is, if you add up, I've forgotten what year we acquired that property, but over however many years it's been, the money that we have spent probably comes close to the cost it's going to eventually cost us to demolish it. So I feel like we continue to throw good money after bad. And I know this year is not the year that I can push to put out a warrant article again to demolish it. But I just think it's something kept in mind of we're wasting money every year that we throw more money at that building.
We closed, just so you know, we closed in the building 2.5 years ago. So we've owned it since July of 2018, I think it was. I think that was when we closed on it. So we've only owned the building for 2.5 years, and we're last year was the first year we got a full year of utility that we could accurately get an accurate number for that we could budget for. But the actual cost has really only been, it's been under $10,000 a year to keep it alive, to keep it there. So it hasn't been significant yet. If it keeps going longer term, then I agree with you. But after only 2.5 years, it's still fairly minimal.
I seem to remember last year when we discussed this at the budget committee, and I don't have in front of me the exact numbers, but that Matt had come up with a number that was like 20 to 25,000 a year. Does Matt remember what it is I'm referring to, maybe?
Yeah, well, that was the number that we were given by Saresk to run the building, as if we were going to be inhabiting it. So that's what we budgeted for, because we weren't sure about the purpose. And so thus the cut for this year.
Okay. So while I still feel like we're throwing good money after bad, but it's kind of stopping the bleeding to some degree. Okay, I guess this is an issue that will continue on my back burner till next year, but it's something I certainly don't want to defer any longer than necessary, because to me, we don't really need to be spending that money at all. The building should be demolished, and the utility that the police and fire department may get out of it, I am fairly certain they can achieve those same functions elsewhere. So, you know, I just feel like the sooner we get rid of it, the better.
But remember that the disposition was tied to that warrant article about the site planning that we got. And Matt shared with the board some progress he's made on it, but the disposition of the building is tied to the larger plan that we want to do. And I'm not sure, Matt, when we're going to get that report out, if it's going to be in next fiscal year or what, but I know that that's sort of the plan, right? So I think the board wants to tear it down for sure, but we want to make sure that we're, one, this wasn't the right year to budget the amount of money, but two, we want to make sure that plan gets at least, we get a look at what that plan is and see what the recommendation is, see if we can have an economy of scale. So
that's always been my question. In general, for most of what we're doing, I agree we need a plan before we proceed. In the case of this building, I can't envision any scenario that the new plan would not entail tearing down that building. So why we persist in deferring the tearing down of the building, waiting on the plan, to me makes no sense. How would we ever not tear down the building?
The cost to tear the building could be less if we're doing other things at the same time. That's the logic. But anyway, that's not, I don't know how deep we want to go into this one.
A dead horse for tonight.
We all set there?
Yep.
Well, Carol, you may not have to wait until next year. Budget deliberations have not concluded yet for this year. I would also say that wasteful spending is never tied to any disposition whatsoever. And this red building truly has been a subject of wasteful spending. I will leave it at that for this evening. Matt, could you please inform us relative to any advancements you've made in the master plan?
No, we're still, we would have been a lot further along if we could have done it in the fashion we wanted to, with live public hearings and public inputs and meetings, but COVID just kind of took the steam out of that. So right now we're just working with the schematic that we have of the existing property and making sure that we have everything there. And then we'll be looking to move forward in the spring.
Could you inform us about the Safe Routes to School program?
Safe Routes to School. Well, that's something that the upper elementary school participates in. They have a day where they walk to school from the high school parking lot. But as far as any funding for that, that was for a sidewalk along O'Gara Drive. And that was years ago we did that. And the project, the sidewalk along O'Gara, was around $86,000, and Safe Routes to School wasn't looking at anything anything less than $300,000 to $400,000. So our little sidewalk didn't even make a blip on their radar, which I think everybody wished they would have known up front, because it would have saved a lot of time and energy. But, that's the way it goes. So we got to know people from the state, but there's no money, at least for school districts, for Safe Routes to School.
And how about our town center committee?
That's going very, I think that's going very well. You may know I'm a member of that. I've been a member for a couple of years now. And, it's part of, once we get the master plan done, we run it past the board and the planning and building committee, and we utilize resources from the town, mainly, Kyle Fox, public works director, Tim Thompson, the community development director, and we run it through past the town center committee, get their input. That would be an invaluable resource to have those people take a look at it also, or be involved in the planning process when it gets to that point.
And we're getting some sidewalk on Woodbury.
Yes, that's the town center committee. There was I don't know if they still call it the highway block grant. They used to call it that years ago, but there's some money that the town is getting in order to put some associated drainage and a sidewalk on Woodbury.
Thanks, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Lori.
So I gave a homework assignment to our superintendent, and I would just love to hear his feedback on the students that have left the district this year and the percentages that are homeschooled VLAX versus private charter.
So I thank you, Mrs. Peters. I did that, and so I have my homework assignment right here. So charter schools, and we don't break down by which charter schools in this, but charter schools in 2019, 2020, there were 148 students who attended charter schools. And in the 2020, 2021, that number is 123. So that's a decrease of 25. Private schools in 2019, 20, that number was 19. And in 2020, 2021, that number has grown to 53. VLAX, the total number in 2019, 2020 was 102. In 2020, 2021, that number is 154. Of that 154, 23 are full-time, and the remainder are half-time VLACs. And we're not sure in what direction that's going. In other words, whether they're en route to full-time VLACs or what have you, but at the moment, that's the number. And homeschool in 2019, 2020, the number was 79. In 2020, 2021, that number has grown to 144. So taking all that into account, there are 126 students at charter, private, VLACs, or homeschooling for 2020, 2021 school year.
Okay, I'm confused. You have 349 fewer students in enrollment this year than last year. So I'm trying to figure out where that number comes from. Because that's not the number you gave me in totality of those.
May have, yeah, well, I mean, some may have just moved out of district, not gone to, to a particular school, but just moved away, moved to another district, moved to another state. So, yeah.
Mark, I think maybe the confusion is if I total those two columns, the 1920 numbers and the 2021 numbers, I'm coming up with different numbers than what you said. So I think maybe that's where Lori's confusion is.
Well, so say more. I mean, I want to be helpful. I'm not.
Okay, I've made myself a grid here. And on the side, I have charter and private and VLACs and homeschool. And then I have two columns. One is for the year 19 versus to 20, and the second column is for 20 to 21. And you gave us numbers that filled in both of those columns.
Yeah.
Now, if I total, excuse me, if I total those two columns, that's where I'm starting to have trouble reconciling my numbers to what the numbers you just gave me. So maybe you can tell me.
So what I'm trying to say is that if you're talking about variance between the 1920 and 2021, there are there's a net increase of 126 students who are at charter, private, VLACs, or homeschool this year over the previous year.
Okay, so from my perspective, that clears it up, because the way you said it, I thought you were trying to say that was the total that were enrolled in all those, and I was like,
my apologies. Yep, sorry.
That's my confusion. I don't know if that was also Lori's confusion or not.
Nope, mine was different.
So was, okay. So is that helpful or not helpful?
I think it's helpful. It's just something that I think we need to track and see, and that may be why, as you presented last week, that the organization that helps you project is projecting lower than would have been without COVID, because I do think some of those students are not going to return. Mm-hmm. The private charter in particular, and probably the large chunk that have moved out of the district. And I think it's good to know now, so that when we get to next year, we can look at it again.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yes.
Okay, are we all set? Do we have more comments? Well, it looks like we're all set. I would like to thank you, Mark, and thank you, John, and thank you, Matt, for your presentation this evening, and very thoroughly addressing all of our committee's concerns. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time and your energies.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes our review of the budget this evening. We have scheduled 2 more meetings, one on February 2nd and one on February 9th. It appears that because of the small number of warrant articles that we need to consider, and we have to consider those on the 9th and hold a public hearing. We may be able to do without the February 2nd workshop. And I wanted to get the committee's feeling about that.
Chuck?
Yes.
Yeah, I am probably not going to be helpful because I can argue for both sides of that argument, but I'll throw out my thoughts. In favor of keeping the schedule as it was, is it gives us a time frame between our workshop and our final meeting. If we want to reconsider anything, we have a little time that week in between to think about it. However, obviously, you know, time is valuable, and spending time in 2 meetings versus 1, you know, has an opportunity cost. So I can argue both sides of it. I'm not sure which side I come down in favor of.
Would we be doing the February 2nd meeting by Zoom?
No, there would be no meeting.
I'm saying if we were to do it.
Yes, we would.
So
the February 9th meeting will be in person.
Okay. So in terms of whether or not to have the second meeting, if it's by Zoom, if we keep it on the calendar, we have it there. We can convene the meeting, determine there's no business, and adjourn the meeting if there's really nothing to cover. Being by Zoom, we can do that in the time it takes to do 2 roll call votes.
Any other reflections, considerations? Got a full committee here.
I just was wondering, Andy, when is the school board going to finalize the revision or presentation of the warrant article for technology?
Well, I believe, and is Matt still here? Mark?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think the agenda for next Monday's meeting is for us to finalize the warrant. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that warrant article currently has the normal elected officials special meeting. It's going to have a warrant article. You'll need to see about the support staff agreement. It'll have it will not have the board has already decided not to do the equipment 1-to-1 warrant, but there is a warrant out there around ventilation that we're going to talk about on Monday that you probably need to hear. And then there'll be a warrant for the operating budget. So we're going to finalize that on Monday. So you would be prepared on Tuesday, the 2nd, or whatever date that is, to see what the warrant is at that point. You'd still need the meeting on the 9th to look at warrants if there's a petition one that comes in, because I think that's the deadlines. But we will be done with the school board warrant as of Monday.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
I agree with Brian. Let's keep it on the schedule. And then if after we've had time to reflect and think through and listen to the school board meeting on Monday, we're good, we can come in and decide there's no business and move forward to the 9th, or we can discuss at that workshop.
Okay, fair enough. Our next meeting then will be on February 2nd, and we'll have some discussion to take place, right? Okay. Let's see. All right. Any other member comments? We heard a great deal this evening. Any other member comments? Well, I'll just say one last thing about the red building. I fully intend to move that we shut down the building entirely. In good conscience, I can't see us wasting any money whatsoever on that building. So I want the committee to at least give that some consideration until it comes up again.
Chuck, can you elaborate just briefly? When you say shut down, do you mean demolish or do you mean something else?
No, I mean to simply stop paying for the sewage and the electrical and the gas and plywood over the windows, padlock the door.
All right, I guess the further discussion will have to be at the next meeting, but at least now I know what you have in mind.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Dan says yes. Second to that?
Second.
Who was the second?
Ellen.
Ellen, thank you very much. We are not, all those in favor?
Are we allowed to just say aye, or do we have to do a roll call?
No, the ayes have it. It's fine. We are now adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Merrimack TV is committed to our community. From gavel-to-gavel coverage of town and school board meetings to updates on town services and projects, we aim to keep you connected.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Fox, Public Works Director for the town of Merrimack.
Hi, I'm Diane Trippett. I'm the town clerk tax collector for the town of Merrimack.
I'm Captain Matt Tarleton with the Merrimack, New Hampshire Police Department.
And keep the public informed of every motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And many moments, so you can be confident that we're here for you. Thanks for watching. Stay connected. Follow Merrimack TV on Facebook.